confront public officials. Demand action. If we don't stop them, we will all be targeted individuals.
I've got the power!
TI's rule, perps rule.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and this is cuttingthroughthematrix.com. 19th of December 2012. For newcomers, as always, I advise you to make good use of my website, cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and help yourself to the free audios for download, because there's so many of them, and they go through the system you're born into, and you've been involved in warfare your whole life, and you never knew it. You never knew there was a group that declared war upon you before you were born, and a lot of them didn't get born because of it, actually, and also on your parents before you, and your grandparents too. Perpetual war to change all of society into the way that this particular minority wanted it to be changed into. And they didn't declare it on, they didn't tell you they were under it. They came out in different fashions and actually got you to do the campaigning yourselves. We're awfully good at adopting campaigns when we're convinced eventually by these people that we're all victims. But anyway, go into the website, make good use of it, and you'll start to understand the big system that's the New World Order, as they call it today, the global society, and why everything's happening the way it's happening today, at a rapid pace, in fact, because this is the century of change. The big boys said it themselves in their own books over 100 years ago, that this would be the century of change. By this time, would have debased us so much, basically, destroyed the cultures of the countries completely, until we're at their mercy, and we're into this flux of massive change. And once you have us in complete flux, nothing to hold on to, you can really ramp it forward and bring in this utopia for the ones who brought it all to you, not for you, mind you. And I go through the history of it, so help yourself at the website cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Remember too, you can also get print-ups of a lot of talks I've given and all the sites I have listed there, and you can go into Alan Watt Sentinel.eu for transcripts in other languages for print-up. And you are the audience that bring me to you, and I always get this out the way rather than pester you all the way through the broadcast, which is wrong, of course. I should do it all through the broadcast, but you can keep me going by buying the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and you can also donate. And I'm serious about it too. I really need the donations to come in, because it's a bad time, bad year, and of course we're all going through this hyperinflation idea of austerity, as they like to call it today, rather than poverty, which is what it really means, bringing down into poverty by a bunch of multi-billionaires and trillionaires. And to do so from the US, you can go into the site and you can still use personal checks to Canada. You can also use international postal money orders from your post office to Canada. You can send cash or use PayPal. And across the world, you've got Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal once again. And remember, straight donations are awfully welcome indeed. But we're rapidly going through the changes. Now, whenever the big boys want something to happen in a cultural fashion to weaken the cultures, again, what's left of them, and I don't even mean what is left of them, there's not much culture left in most of the countries, because that was the main obstacle of a minority coming in to take over, in fact. That to become the dominant minority themselves, so that to oust the previous dominant minority and then give you a different culture, which everyone's adopted and adapted to very easily. stage by stage, until we're completely defunct. And then the boys turn around at the top and tell you, look how dysfunctional you all are. And we still need this to happen, and this to happen, and this to happen. So they give you all the appropriate things to happen to make you say to government, please do something. And of course, they come through with the laws they'd already drafted up long ago, and they blow off the dust and implement them. That's how you do things in real life, you understand, in society. For social change, and social engineers, of course, are behind this too, that were implanted in all universities a long, long time ago. They moved in from the Soviet system. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, I'm back. We're cutting through the matrix. Now, I've mentioned that the big boys have lots of plans for us, and of course they've implemented them all your lives, and you've adapted to each stage of upgrading your own way of looking at life or behavior modification, and you didn't even know it because everyone was adapting at the same time, because you're living in such a scientifically controlled system, plus all the media is owned by the same people basically. And you think you've got lots of various news articles to read, but it's all from the same sources. And believe you me, it's all connected together. Nothing gets out there that you're not supposed to think about or know about. That's exactly what Brzezinski talked about many years ago in one of his books in the 1970s, that eventually the public won't be able to think or talk about anything the following day. All they can talk about is the previous night's news. And that's what you're given, all your trivia, etc. And also, you see things at face value. That like a picture is worth a 1,000 words, as they say. And if you go back to even the polio scams that were going on to get the vaccines through, they kept showing you the same boy in the iron lung. It was just the same boy in an iron lung. It looked horrific, and of course it terrified everybody. Did a great job of getting everyone injected with polio vaccine, which they admitted afterwards, and Salk himself said it too. And I've even put the old clips up of him talking about it. He knew there was cancer viruses amongst it, you know. And he thought it outweighed all the risks and all the rest of it, getting polio vaccination. But anyway, we've been tampered with our whole lives long. So they give you things like that. Same with the mad cow disease in Britain. When they wiped out pretty well all the livestock of Britain, all the animals were slaughtered. Had pyramids of burning cattle and pigs and everything in Britain, all over the media. Look it all up and see it. Horrific. Because they kept showing you one clip of one cow going across a farmyard and dragging its back legs. Now, you can get the same effect by a local anesthetic into the spine. But just the one cow, for all that time they went back to the one cow. Months it lasted, one cow. And that's how things are done in this world. And remember, too, that ties in, and it almost worked in Britain, because the people for a little while became primarily vegetarian. And that's exactly what all the big boys and the New Agers and the Greenies have been talking about, creating a vegetarian world. Alvin Toffler has it in his book, The Third Wave, and Newt Gingrich has been promoting that. He says, we shall create a vegetarian world. And it must be so. He didn't say why it must be so, but he said it nonetheless. Nowadays, of course, they say that it takes, so much field acreage and so on to grow that feed for the cattle, etc. And all that kind of stuff. They even go after your pets and say, do you know how much it costs to feed your pets? They're very ruthless in this scientific dictatorship, you understand. But what I'm saying is they give you the events, and then they give you a collective punishment. Same with the bank crashes. They kept talking about bringing the world into austerity in academia. And bingo, the banks crash on cue. They knew for years they were going to crash it. And they kept at it to the end, knowing they were all going to get bailed out, by the way. They had lots of meetings amongst themselves, knowing they were going to get bailed out. But it was necessary to bring in this new term called austerity. Worldwide. And the United Nations, of course, is involved with all of this chronology as well. But you find the people who came in and taught you your social sciences, as I say, they all came in the 1930s. They flooded in from different countries across what were the communist blocs and so on, and the German blocs. And a lot of them got false IDs and false credentials. They were basically communists, and they were given jobs right into universities across Britain, Europe, and the US without question. And then they started their move to change and destroy the present existing cultures of the dominant minority at the top, obviously. And then they took over. So they always create the thing to happen and then give you the answer, which is always collective punishment. That's the guise of it, at least, to get what they want. Now, the United Nations and all the big boys and these radicals, these people who radicalize societies, that's what they do when they come in. They radicalize them through universities primarily, and again through the media which they own. They go after things like abortion, and it's like mandatory to get abortion in all countries. It was strange even reading a lot of the communist history, where the father of Armand Hammer, who changed the name to be the Arm and Hammer of communism, he was a backstreet abortionist, the father. An absolute communist that came into the US and was performing it there. He was caught a few times. He had no credentials whatsoever. And it was a particular reason he gave for doing it. It wasn't for women. It was to stop tyrants rising. Unwanted children, they claimed, were tyrants. They ended up going for this particular group. And even Morgenthaler, that brought in abortion in Canada, I couldn't believe it when he said on television that he was doing the world a great favor. It was of God's work. Because otherwise these unwanted children would become another Hitler. That's what he said. No kidding. So it's a very real. Now the Frankfurt School also went on that same kick for a long, long time in all of their writings, that all the peoples they came into, all the countries they moved into, were technically insane. And they'd have to get lifelong psychological evaluations. That's when they come out of these shootings, by the way, as well. They're already doing it in Scotland. They didn't have the shootings. And across parts of Europe as well. Sarkozy was heavily involved in this particular project. Now, getting back to Ireland, it says Ireland is to legalize abortion. And remember, Ireland has a constitution, just like the US. It's got its own constitution. And it says when the mother's life is at a risk, including when she is suicidal, in a historic move expected to spark a major battle with the Roman Catholic Church. Well, if you understand history, the Roman Catholic Church was the only people who watched this people who moved into countries and what they did. They kept a record of it all. And in fact, the Catholic Church became the main enemy of this particular group. And it says here that Ireland's cabinet took the decision Tuesday following a huge public outcry over the death of Savita Halapanever, a pregnant woman in October who died after her repeated requests for an abortion were refused while she was suffering a miscarriage. The Irish government has decided to repeal legislation that makes abortion a criminal act and to introduce regulations setting out when doctors can perform an abortion when a woman's life is regarded as being at risk, including by suicide. Dr. James Riley, the Irish Health Minister, said that the government was aware of the controversy surrounding abortion. He said, I know that most people have personal views on the matter. However, the government is committed to ensuring the safety of pregnant women. So here you have, it doesn't matter your personal views or your cultural views. He says the government's committed to ensure the safety. This safety thing is the key they use with everything. Safety. They can take you over in totalitarian systems like the US under the guise of safety, right? And there's no safety when governments are totalitarian, believe you me. But of pregnant women in Ireland is maintained and strengthened. We must fulfill our duty of care towards them, he said. This is caring now, is just to abort life, children. Right? And which means as well as throwing your constitution out down the toilet. Because this is what they're doing. That's the first one. And go, what's next? Well, we know what's next. It's the same as every other country, as you all know. Special rights and all the rest of it and so on. It says, for that purpose, we'll clarify in legislation and regulation what's available by way of treatment to women when a pregnancy gives rise to a threat to a woman's life. We'll also clarify what's legal for the professionals who must provide that care while at all times taking full account of the equal right to life of the unborn child and so on. But then you go into also this article here. It all ties in, you see. It says Ireland's prospects of exiting its international bailout depend importantly on the delivery of European commitments, the International Monetary Fund has said. Now, I mentioned the International Monetary Fund last night. It's to be the big heavy, the heavy for the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements. That's what it is. It's a big debt collector too. And this was set up by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations. Carol Quigley, the historian, talks about the whole darn thing. He says this is the system, the Bank for International Settlements at the top for the World Bank, in the IMF to collect debts, run countries when they fail. And they literally come in and run your country. And I'm talking about all of the UN agenda comes with it. It says, so it says, in its latest quarterly report on the government's compliance with the terms of the bailout and its assessment of the state of the economy, the fund said risks to economic growth in Ireland have profound adverse implications for government debt sustainability. Stressing the fragility of Ireland's position, the fund said doubts on the financial markets about the state's capacity to repay its debt could easily re-emerge. So little threats here and there, you see. In its review, the IMF delivered a strongly worded signal to other members of the Troika and Eurozone member states. Delivery on European commitments, especially direct bank recapitalisation, is critical, it said. And then you go into this one, and it says here, now this goes back to 1998, this article I'm about to read here. And you think these are all separate organisations, the IMF, World Bank, Bank for International, they all come under the United Nations. And this says here, and it says, Washington, it's from Reuters, House Majority Leader Dick Armey said Tuesday that the White House may have to negotiate with lawmakers on unrelated anti-abortion issues to garner the votes necessary for House approval of the International Monetary Fund bailout funds. It's starting to click here, folks. Says Armey, a Texas Republican, said efforts to reach a majority of votes for the IMF funding may require the Clinton administration to accept restrictions that bar agencies from using U.S. funds to lobby foreign governments to change their abortion laws. Is it starting to click, folks? We're going to continue to press to relieve taxpayers of the burden of that kind of use of their money and every place where we have an opportunity to say so, he said. So I'll put this as quite a long article. So one of the conditions of getting this into this bailout and so on is you must put through abortion, you see. And not only that, like places like the US, when they join it, they must, when they give it a loan from the US through the IMF, because this is what they do. We're all part of the IMF. Then they mandate that you must also push the other countries to push abortion. Now it's the primary goal in the US today. It's the primary goal to push homosexual agendas from the United Nations. Who runs the United Nations? What is the United Nations? You have to do your history, folks. Awfully quickly. Back with more after this break. Hi, folks. We're cutting through the matrix and still in Ireland. It's amazing how certain quarters keep attacking Ireland because they're kind of holdouts in many ways to the dominant minority that now rules pretty well the world. But it says here, this is from the Israeli embassy in Ireland. This is a post they put up. It says Israel's diplomatic corps finds itself in hot water after posting an inflammatory message on an official Facebook page. Although the message has now been deleted, this is not the first time Israel has used social media to post controversial views. That's putting it mildly. It says the message appeared on the Israel in Ireland Facebook page, which is linked to the official embassy site, on Monday morning. The post comprised a painting of Mary and Jesus, accompanied by the following caption. It says, a thought for Christmas. If Jesus and Mother Mary were alive today, they would, as Jews without security, probably end up being lynched in Bethlehem by hostile Palestinians. Just a thought, it says. The message sparked immediate heated debate, but was taken down within hours. And it says, so anyway, the image of Jesus with a derogatory comment about Palestinians was posted without the consent of the administrator of the Facebook page. This is what they came back with. We've removed the post in question immediately. Apologies to anyone who may have been offended. I'm sure there's a big smile there too, said an official statement from the Israeli embassy in Dublin. The message provoked a heated discussion, it says, since then the Israel and Ireland page has been shut down altogether and the link on the official website has been removed. It's not the first time the account, which is updated by unnamed embassy staff, broadcast strong opinions. Actually, it's giving you the finger, folks. I mean, because it's well known about the particular religion that's particularly hated. It says, it previously claimed that Palestinian children play how to launch a missile in order to hit innocent Israeli children, women and men. The apple does not fall far from the tree. And that pro-Palestinianism is often just a politically correct cover for anti-Semitism. That's what it says, the Post. Although a popular tourist destination for Israelis, Ireland has a tempestuous relationship with Israel. The Israeli mission, which is headed by Boaz Moshe, who's deputized by his wife Nurit Tanari Modeh, has captured the headlines with its confrontational approach. Last year, Tanari Modeh claimed in a letter that Ireland-based Jews should have their private information made public if they criticize their homeland, which is Israel. It says, yet the Post doesn't appear to be an isolated incident. It appears an example of Israel's wider policy of Hasbara, which loosely translates as explanation. Hasbara is seen as a concerted effort to forcefully promote Israeli views in the face of what Jerusalem perceived to be predominantly anti-Israel media coverage worldwide. Although the term appeared in the 1970s, the policy has gained new impetus with the ascent of social media. Within the semi-official policy, Israeli embassies have turned from bland conduits of diplomatic formalities to headline-grabbing broadcast stations. For example, ahead of the recent votes on the status of Palestine in the UN, the Israeli embassy in Washington posted a cartoonish video showing Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas driving a bus full of radicals. At the end of the video, Abbas was faced with a fork in the road with UN membership leading to a war zone and an alternative to an idyllic land of peace. The video was widely lambasted as disrespectful in the media. And it goes on and on about different things too. But there's definitely much going on, you understand. You have to understand the history of all of this. If you don't look into it for yourself, don't look for other people's opinions. You've got to dig into the history yourself to find out actually what's going on. Because there's lots of folk there that'll put you off even investigating. I mean, Hollywood's already done that. Fantastic in its way to make you hate particular segments of society or the churches, or any churches at all for that matter. And also from the Council on Foreign Relations, the ones who basically run all the media of the planet, the organization that formed with all the bankers is the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London, England. They run every country's prime ministers and presidents. That's from their own history books, by the way, written by their own historian, Carol Quigley. And it says here, Newtown, Hanukkah, Joseph and Barak. This is from CFR. It says, for our family and closest friends, this month has been a season of celebrating bar mitzvahs, the Jewish coming of age of life, for the 13-year-old boys and girls, and of Hanukkah, the 8-day festival of lights. Once a minor holiday, Hanukkah celebrates the martial bravery of the Maccabean revolt against Antiochus IV, who wanted to ban Jewish practice in Jerusalem. 20th century American Jews, hoping to compete with Christmas, elevated Hanukkah and made it mostly a children's holiday focused on miracles more than warfare. And it goes on too to talk, and then eventually gets into the shootings, the school shootings, you see, and how it was terrible to watch President Obama address the Newtown families in the community at the memorial and so on. And it's obviously pushing again for more things to be done about it. But it was interesting too to see who wrote it, because this article for it, because there's a link on the CFR site. It takes you to their own person, their own particular person for the Council on Foreign Relations for the Brazilian department in Brazil. So they've got departments in every country in the world, because they're heavily involved in every country in the world, the CFR. And, of course, we have the White House. It says, ready as gun control plan as more children are laid to rest. And it says, the White House revealed the first steps of a gun control plan Wednesday as the United States grieve for victims. President Barack Obama's initiative addressed national outrage over the shootings in Connecticut, which prompted longtime gun rights supporters to reconsider their positions in a major private equity to put its gun-making businesses up for sale. And that was a terror bus I mentioned yesterday. And it's interesting who owned it. He also lived in Newtown, by the way. I might put a link up tonight about that. Back with more after this break.
listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, I am back. We're cutting through the matrix and reading an article, one of the many articles. I'll put them all up tonight that I have on the shootings and so on. But it's to do with President Obama and also talking about Joe Biden and so on. It's to lead an effort to craft policies to reduce gun violence, and specific steps Biden recommends would be unveiled in Obama's State of the Union address, which is typically given towards the end of January, but Obama indicated some priorities. He said, we're going to need making access to mental health at least as easy as to access a gun, he said. Now, and also too, Biden mentioned it earlier in this article to do with basically mental states and so on. I bet you see, I know what they're going to do. They want this particular group that runs the world put this into even the United Nations a long, long time ago. And again, through the Frankfurt School and all the other organizations that joined them, to do with testing every citizen's mental health. And I mentioned before, they're already doing it in Scotland from birth and through their teenage years as well, but now it's in the adulthood as well. They want everyone tested on an ongoing basis for readjustment, you understand. If you're not PC and your latest update didn't take because you questioned it, they'll make sure that you eventually are fixed properly, the same as they did in the old Soviet Union. And there's a big connection between the old Soviet Union and those who rule it and those who fled out of it and now run everything else. Big connection, folks. So I'll put this up tonight too, because mental health is going to be a big, big part of all of this is going to come out of these laws, guarantee you. That's been after this for a long time, and now they have their excuse. And the whole story stinks like all the other stories of these kind of mass shootings, stinks to high heaven. Nothing makes sense. I mean, one of the stories that came out from mainstream said that inside the school it was riddled with these 223 bullets and there was empty cartridges everywhere. And yet the same story says he was found with 2 pistols, not the rifle that fired these 223 bullets, and they found the rifle in his trunk of his car. Well, who was doing all the shooting, the 223 bullets? Just simple things like that. It's always the same. Always the same. And also, this article here, again, is announced plans Obama is for a new gun control initiative, saying he's tasked Vice President Biden with coming up with a set of proposals to restrict access to automatic weapons, such as the one used in last week's shooting that left 28 people dead. He said he expects Biden, a long-time gun control advocate, to work with a team of people from both sides of the political spectrum before presenting proposals by the end of January. And their task is going to be sift through every good idea that's out there and even take a look at some bad ideas before disposing of them and come up with a concrete set of recommendations in about a month, said Obama, speaking from the White House. I'd hope our memories aren't so short that we saw in Newton isn't lingering with us what we saw, that we don't remain passionate about it a month later. Obama said he plans to push legislation without delay following the report from Biden's team and urged Congress to hold votes on the new law next year. Now, the same group that wanted to bring Sovietization to the world and then split off from the old Stalin stuff, eventually when he turned on them, they became Trotskyists, you understand, and they all ran on into the West. As I say, lots of them got professorships right away and were flooded to the universities and so on, and started teaching their social sciences, as they like to call it. A lot of it was just pure Marxism. Other ones was camouflage Marxism. But their whole purpose was to radicalize students to question and go against the whole existing system. And not to help them and free them, but so that the same group could then dominate them and become the dominant minority. That's happened. That's what happened, folks. Now, in this wonderful US, which they still sing is free, this in their songs and all, but SWAT cops are to ask for IDs from everyone in an Arkansas town. It says there isn't a lot to do in Paragould, Arkansas, but residents of the town of barely 25,000 seem to have no problem finding trouble. Now, in order to curb the rising crime rate, the city is proposing heavily armed police patrols to the streets on foot. It says, but it also shows you an armored vehicle there too. At a town hall meeting on Thursday, Mayor Mike Gaskell and Police Chief Todd Stovall endorsed a plan to send cops dressed in full-fledged SWAT gear and equipped with AR-15s into downtown Paragould starting in 2013. So once again, you see all this focus on any military-style equipment being taken from the public, while you're living in a police state where they're getting more and more of this stuff all the time. You know, all the latest of everything, every toy the military is using, the cops have got. That's a scary thing to witness, you understand, when you know the history, the world's history, especially in the 20th century. The militarized police force will be tasked with trying to control a crime rate that has made Paragould an increasingly dangerous place to live in recent years. And then they give you the stats as always, which are always off. I mean, statistics, and it's like it's true. I think it was Roosevelt and others have said the same quote, you know, that there's lies, then there's damn lies, and then there are statistics. In other words, you can't argue with science. It gives the appearance of science to get what they want. It's the same with polls. Most folk are herd animals. They want to join the winning bunch. And so when they hear 80%, 90% want this, they'll join in and want it too. This is what they believe, you see. There's actually histories on the cons that when they first came out with polling. The whole idea was to do just that, to con the rest. Anyway, it says, the militarized police force, and there you go, militarized police force will be tasked with trying to control a crime rate. And Paragould's an increasingly dangerous place to live, blah, blah, blah. It says, this fear is what's given us a reason to do this. Once I have stats and people saying they're not scared, we can do this. In order to bring crime down, residents of Paragould may soon have to endure police officers brandishing semi-automatic assault rifles on the regular, it says. Bad way of writing. It says, what's more, Stovall says he intends to have the cops collecting identification from everyone and anyone in an attempt to discourage criminal activity. This is beyond the Stasi in East Germany. If you're out walking, we're going to stop you and ask you why you're out walking and check for your ID. The Daily Press reports him saying during last week's meeting. That's daytime as well. To ask you for ID, I have to have a reason. He said, well, I've got statistical reasons. So there you go. Statistics are those reasons. Let's say I've got a lot of crime right now, which gives me probable cause to ask what you're doing out. Then when I add that people are scared, then that gives us even more reason to ask why you're here and what you're doing in this area. Well, you don't get kind of scared if these guys are dressed up in military gear. You've had years of propaganda from the TV, the mainstream media, and the militarized culture from Hollywood to make you scared, you know. And then what are you going to do next? Well, they'll probably do all their cavity searches and all the rest of it next too, in broad daylight. They actually did that to 2 women in the States there, and it's from the Raw Story. I'll put that up tonight as well. You'll see the video, and you'll see this kind of butch-type creature with the usual shape too, putting on gloves to do body searches in the street, on the roadside, as cars pass and a whole bit. And she uses the same gloves to do both of them, and she goes into the anus and the vagina with the same gloves, folks. This is America the free. Is it? Soon after the Paragould Daily Press picked up the story, news of the small town's efforts to enforce martial law began making headlines outside of Arkansas. On Sunday, Stovall authorized an explanation on the Paragould Police Department website to clarify how exactly the proposed street crimes unit will interact with citizens. It says most often this identification process will be nothing more than making contact with a subject. You're subjects now, you see. Kind of like the British subjects under the Queen, handing them a business card and asking if they live in the area and if there's anything we can do for them. Oh, they're standing there with, you know, bayonets and assault rifles and a whole bit. What can you do for them? You open this tin can for me, please. I've lost my can opener. During hours in which crime seems to be more prevalent, however, Chief Stovall says our process will become more stringent. We'll be asking for picture identification. We'll be ascertaining where the subject lives and what they are doing in the area. We'll be keeping a record of those we contact. He adds that the program will not violate the constitutional rights of Paragould citizens, claiming once we have an area that shows a high crime rate or a high call volume, it's our duty and obligation to find out why this is occurring and what we can do to prevent the trend from continuing. Therefore, identifying subjects in those problem areas help us to solve crimes and hopefully to prevent future crimes. So, there you go, folks. Yep. There you go. And as I said, the two women sued Texas troopers for illegal roadside cavity search. And it says, a federal lawsuit filed by two Irving women claimed that the Texas state troopers humiliated them by performing illegal cavity searches on the side of the road after a cigarette butt was thrown out of the car window. The state trooper, David Farrell, called in a female trooper, to perform cavity searches of Angel Dobbs, 38, and her 24-year-old niece, Ashley Dobbs, because he said that he smelled marijuana and the women were acting weird. Well, folk get kind of weird when you're pulled over today with cops who can taser you or just shoot you. Angel Dobbs recalled that the female trooper, Kelly Hellison, asked for her permission to perform the search and then told her to shut up and just listen. Dashcam video shows Hellison searching the anuses and vaginas of both women with the same latex gloves. Didn't change them or anything for either women or between the anus and the vagina, in full view of other passing cars. At this point, I'm in clear shock. Can't even believe it's happening, says Angel Dobbs, and so on. So, she says it's because it says if someone's a daily smoker in that car, you can attribute to that. The trooper can be heard telling Angel Dobbs. So if you're a smoker, that's what they're going to do to you now. That's good enough. It's because someone's a daily smoker in that car, and that's just a crime today, even though it's legal to buy smokes, although they don't want you to smoke. Yep. God bless America, the land of the free and all that. Now, we know too that Monsanto and all the big boys are taking over all of basically the farms. The New World Order will only have international corporations running your whole food supply. It's pretty well there. Just like international corporations put out all the small grocery stores, they'll also put out all your hardware stores and everything else, give you Walmarts and Home Depots and all these things. And the same thing with your farms. So they're going for big time, all the farms. And it says milk prices could hit $6 a gallon without the Farm Bill resolution. So these are scare tactics. Milwaukee is a nation that inches towards the economic fiscal cliff. Oh, fiscal cliff, here we go. Anxiety is growing in farm country, but an obscure tangent of the Washington political standoff that reaches into the dairy industry and indirectly into the household budgets of consumers who buy milk and cheese. Little noticed in the struggle over major looming tax increases and spending cuts is that the outcome could also affect the Farm Bill, in which Congress didn't complete action this year after it expired in September. Agriculture industry leaders hope the farm legislation can be added to any final fiscal package before the end of the year. But if no fiscal agreement is reached and the farm legislation is left adrift, farmers could face the prospect of returning to an antiquated system for pricing milk that would bring big price increases for consumers. So they're using this as an excuse. If you don't sign this again, you go back to the dark ages. But actually, it was a lot cheaper back then, the milk. So it's a scare tactic, that article, to get people to go along and have it signed. And even call it milk today after they've boiled the hell out of it. And they take so much of the nourishment out in other ways as well. And then they homogenize it to make sure you'll die of heart attacks and stuff. You understand, this is a war. These are war tactics. These are real war tactics. And they call it total war. Including sterilizing people and everything. That's total war. They put them all sterile bit by bit. They don't even know what's happening themselves. And it's all a big mystery in the medical, associations. Oh, it's a mystery. And wellness. This is the big con. You understand you're in Orwell's land because he was writing about this particular ideology that I've been mentioning since the beginning of the broadcast tonight. And he knew who was behind it too, of course. And Orwell gave you all the crazy stuff in his book 1984, and double speak and double think and all this stuff. And here they are with their double think, this crazy thing. Remember when the head of the Federal Reserve said, I'm going to promote wellness, well-being, gross well-being rather than GDP. As they bring you into austerity, you're going to feel great, folks. Great, folks. And this is a worldwide law. It's all over the world now. The UN's managing it all. Getting you all trained. They've even got professionals going around areas and doing surveys with people and finding ways to help them become happier with their poverty. You understand what's happening here? Australia's largest not-for-profit private health insurer, HCF, has launched its new generation wellness portal, coinciding with a new survey commissioned by the company, which says Australians have become more proactive in managing their health. And I've mentioned a similar one before. So the commissioned Pure Profile to undertake a survey of more than 1,000 people to coincide with the relaunch of its web-based service, My Health Guardian, with key enhancements to help members to improve their health and well-being. Now there's another article here about it too. It's all getting taught through the schools worldwide. Didn't just happen by itself. You understand, you're run by massive organizations, intricate organizations, right down to the tiniest detail on every aspect of life, folks. You don't have governments. You really don't. There is a super government. It's been here for a long time. This is Inside School Research. It says, child well-being up in spite, it's really Orwellian here, in spite of greater poverty. The index shows it's working. It's working, see? Choco rations is up. And it says America's children and their families are showing greater resilience and support in the face of rising poverty. That's now wiped out the historic financial gains of the 1990s, according to the Foundation for Child Development's annual Child Wellbeing Index. Isn't that wonderful? We should all cheer that one. Are you all happy? You're going to celebrate their happiness and their wellness? Because what's we're supposed to do nowadays is celebrate everybody else's strange things. The New York City-based group announced this morning that overall child well-being is up more than 5%. See, it's back to percentages. Just straight out of Orwell. You got to read the book and actually see the movies. Orwell's 1984. It's all done by statistics and stuff too. All through the movie, you hear the voice in the background shouting out these fake statistics. It says it began a generation ago in 1975. It says. The index is a composite of 28 indicators of both children's environmental and economic environments and their own behaviors. Behaviorism again, you see. This year, those environmental factors continue to be a hurdle rather than a lift for children, according to Deborah A. Phillips, the Foundation's president. The group's family economic well-being indicators have fallen in the past decade, including rising poverty, falling median income, and less secure parental employment, all show to be associated with higher chronic stress on children and families. By God, what would we do without experts, eh? Huh? It's on a massive salary, probably a couple of million a year. From 2001 to 2011, the percentage of children living in families below the poverty line has increased from 15.6% to 21.4%. A third of this increase in child poverty occurred between 2001 and 2007, before the most recent, I will add, bank crash on cue, recession. They don't call it depressions anymore. You can't have depression when you've got gross well-being, Since when we've had recessions, you do see steeper increases in child poverty for sure, but I think what's showing up is a much more fundamental failure of our social policies that guarantee children will not grow up in poverty, Phillips said. We've wiped out economic gains in the past 35 years. But it doesn't matter. Gross well-being in children is up, because of the electronic toys are getting cheaper. Back with more after this. Hi folks, I'm back and we're cutting through the matrix. Now you know that everything that starts with the military ends up getting pushed across all societies, whatever it happens to be. And especially to do with warfare techniques, since there are people who are at war with all of us, because we're all crazy apparently. The whole world's crazy. We need psychologists and psychiatrists, all the ones that came out of the Freudian schools, who again were attached to the same groups again, to do with the Frankfurt School and so on, to change the world. They want to alter us all, you see. But it says DARPA wants to install transcranial ultrasonic mind control devices in soldiers' helmets. And so they've been trying to crawl inside the minds of soldiers for a while, but if a new ultrasound technology could let them get deeper inside than ever. Working on a DARPA grant, researchers at the Arizona State is developing transcranial pulsed ultrasound technology that could be implanted in troops' battle helmets, allowing soldiers to manipulate brain functions to boost alertness, relieve stress, or even reduce the effects of traumatic brain injury, it says. So it's to do with manipulating the brain to enhance war-fighting capabilities. Dr. William J. Tyler, an assistant professor of life sciences at ASU, writes on the Department of Defense's Armed with Science blog. This is from the military. To overcome the above limitations, my laboratory has engineered a novel technology which implements transcranial pulsed ultrasound to remotely and directly stimulate brain circuits without requiring surgery. Further, we have shown this ultrasonic neuromodulation approach confers a spatial resolution approximately 5 times greater than TMS and can exert its effects upon subcortical brain circuits deep within the brain. And you think they can't control people, folks? This has all been done from distances before. The same technology. Same technology. And then again, I'll put up this one here. The United States General gives testimony on radio frequency weapons. And it's General Robert L. Schweitzer. He gives a talk on radio frequency weapons. I'll put that up tonight too. And it shows you all the different names of the different types I've got at the bottom of this particular website. But they've got all this stuff out there. They've had it for years and years and years. They've tested it on the general public. And they can have amazing consequences on the public, believe you me. No one's immune to them pretty well. If it's trained on you, you aren't immune to it. And it goes way, way back 100 years, this kind of technology. Tesla was into ways to knock out whole cities and put them unconscious, and of course it would actually kill you as well. But I mean, they do have these so-called non-lethal, which can be turned up to be lethal weapons, and it's been out for a long, long time. They can actually target individuals as well. And they have been testing it in the publics elsewhere, in different countries. All countries have been testing it actually by the military. They never tell the public, do you mind being a volunteer? Just actually do it and watch your behavior. Maybe they can make you do anything at all. And then what happens? You take the can. Who's going to believe you? And then, of course, everybody who knows you will say, geez, he was such a nice person. Can't imagine him ever doing anything like that. Which would probably be the truth. Left to themselves, it wouldn't have happened at all. You live in a very scientifically controlled world, folks. And nothing on any large scale, any scale like this, happens by coincidence. Even these shootings are planned like a military-style exercise, with incredible precision, with all the loose ends that just don't make any sense at all. And even in that late Batman movie, The Dark Knights, it's true enough. It's in the movie. They have a map there. The target site is Sandy Hook. And on a building, there's Aurora and neon lights in that movie. Hollywood isn't part of this, is it? With all its predictive programming? Or triggering, perhaps? From Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.
The God who gave us life gave us liberty. The problem is there are people in power these days who really don't like that. Come, travel the road to freedom with your host, Eleanor White. Welcome to show number 8, recorded on July 21st, 2005. Road to Freedom is a listener-sponsored show by and about all the targets of electronically assisted vigilante gang stalking throughout the world. Road to Freedom brings you the latest information on this crime wave, which has so far been denied by every government and private agency whose mission is to help those who are targets of crime. The opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests, and may not be those of others who are targets of vigilante stalking and electronic harassment, or of any person or group who may replay these recorded programs. Information for anyone who is thinking about donating to keep Road to Freedom on the air is found on the cover page of this show's website at the bottom. This show's website is shoestringradio.net. That's all one word, shoestringradio.net. Vigilante stalking and the covert use of advanced electronic weapons on vigilante stalking targets is basically the use of lies, again lies, to motivate networked groups of citizens to destroy the lives of their innocent targets. These programs are about the ongoing efforts to expose this activity and hopefully to stop it. Today we'll be talking with Mr. Alan Watt, a longtime researcher of history, religion, politics, and crime, and in particular, the involvement of secret societies in these arenas. Of particular interest to the anti-vigilante stalking and electronic harassment movement are crimes either initiated by or sanctioned by government. Government has been keeping a tight lid on vigilante stalking and electronic harassment and has a history, as explained in earlier shows, of actually committing similar crimes in the name of national security. Alan Watt and other researchers have repeatedly found that membership in secret societies is a prerequisite for positions of authority in all levels of government. The problem is that secret societies have huge portions of their membership who have no idea that, say, 10% of their members are actively but covertly committing grievous crimes. In fact, several targets of vigilante stalking and electronic harassment have reported that known secret society members, usually of the order of free and accepted Masons, have participated in their harassment. So it's not all senior members. Some selected junior members are apparently participants as well. Alan Watt has more to tell along these lines. Alan has written 3 books on his research, and I will let Alan tell the listeners himself how the books can be ordered. The reason I asked Alan to come on is that he has also experienced the type of attacks characteristic of vigilante stalking and electronic harassment. Welcome to Road to Freedom, Alan.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on.
And could you tell us how the listeners could order your books? They're not available in bookstores.
No. Yeah, they can write to me. They're $25 each. That includes postage and packing. And the contents, I say, even the contents aren't your regular off-the-shelf information. I go deep into the research from the ancient times right through to the present times and document it with the very little or scant information which is available when you research it. And if you want to, if one or all of these books, then $25 and a postal order will do from the post office to Alan Watt, which is A-L-A-N, Watt is W-A-T-T. And my address is Site 41, Box 4, Estaire, which is like Fred Astaire, only with an E, E-S-T-A-I-R-E, Ontario. The postal code is P for Peter, 3, E for Elizabeth, 4, N for Nora, 1. But as I say, the information contained within goes as far back as Sumer and philosophers of Greece, because they did more talking about this secret society that was already in existence in their day than probably anyone since. So it's very real. It's all about control of the world. and I delve into their information, and then I bring up current authors who also have been working in government or the CIA or MI6 in Britain, who've also written books about this very technique of electronic harassment, which is very real. It's documented, and it's being used on the public on a much wider scale today. In the 1960s, they were testing it out on individuals more so than today, and targeting them. And they even had a chip implant put into many guys who were in the military in Britain, who suddenly believed that they were being controlled by some computer. And this was a new phenomenon they saw coming into the psychiatric hospitals in the 1960s, before the computer was a household word. And it turns out many, many years later, the government admitted that they did use selective soldiers who went in for minor operations whilst in the military, and they put in various implants to see what effect it had.
Alan, excuse me 1 second. Before we get too far into the topic, you've given the listeners enough to become interested in your books.
Yeah.
And I just want to repeat your address myself so they hear it from two different voices. Yeah. As your telephone connection tends to be a little bit weak.
Uh-huh.
So the address for these books, they're $25 each. A postal money order is fine, but if you send it from outside of Canada, you want to be sure that whatever you send is in Canadian dollars. My understanding is you can send an American postal money order, but you must tell the clerk that you want it in Canadian dollars.
International.
International. And the address is Alan Watt, and that's ALAN WATT. Next line is site, that's SITE 41, then box 4, and the city name is Esther, ESTAIRE, Ontario, country is Canada, and the postal code is P3E space 4N1, and in phonetics that's Papa 3 Echo, then a space, 4 November 1. Okay, now what Alan has said to this point is that he's written about the people behind the power structure throughout history, and what he has discovered is that, distant as it may sound, he's discovered that the secret society people who are lusting for power are not only aware of electronic harassment, but are almost certainly behind it as well. And in private, they're very brutal. They don't pull any punches. They will do anything they have to achieve their dream, which is world domination with their particular members at the top. So would you continue on? You were talking about electronic harassment and these people who lust for power.
Yeah, well, we can go as far back even as to Plato, the Greek philosopher, who he wrote about a future society, which would be the perfect, he called it republics or world states. And he said, even said there'd be a guardian class that would run it from the top. They would have a helping class of bureaucrats and military and so on. And he said the time will come where women will also serve in the front lines with the men, and that will be the time for their final takeover, which is happening today.
It certainly is.
And he also said, the perfect world that we shall construct will be based on the special breeding of selected people for special purposes. So we're into eugenics here. He said, outside of the guardian class, those who are in the military and who have military mindsets will be interbred with the women in the military. So their offspring will constantly be hereditary military, you see. And then he said, we shall breed short, squat men, he said, for going into mines. Tall men, he said, if we people to pick apples, for instance. And he said, in other words, just like the animals that are the domesticated animals, which are inbred for specific qualities, we shall do the same with the he called them the its. He didn't say the lower classes. He called them the its. They were not human as far as he was concerned.
Indeed, and let me say that establishing total control is the only way these things can be done, and that's what leads us to this overwhelming harassment night and day, both by human beings and by electronic equipment that is so advanced the university professors don't know about it.
Yes, and that's the key to it in this system in which we live. I've talked to many high masons way above 33rd degree level, and independently they've all told me the same things. And one of those things was that they love the number 3. The number 3 is the Trinity. They always have a Trinity regardless of the religion they create or push. And they have 3 levels of every science. And from professorship down, I was told, that is the lowest level of any science.
Well, we who are targets of this stuff can assure the listeners, those listeners who have not experienced it, that what Alan just said is the absolute truth. What we have experienced is basically the most bizarre happenings which you read about as paranormal, for example, happen to us. We do not have a clue how it's done, and obviously someone does because it's being done. And it is not poltergeist because the timing is different. We're being observed all the time, and the timing is such as if you're doing something messy or something precise, you will have your body and limbs shoved around so you can't do it. That is not characteristic of a poltergeist attack. You will find that this happens when you go to work as well, or when you're in your car. So what we're saying is our experience backs up Alan's assertion 100% that there are at least 2 levels of science beyond what the best university physics professor knows about.
That's right. It's all compartmentalized, and now some of the equipment that they do use and have used since the 1950s was shown on a CBC television program, the Wendy Mesler show, and when she had Nick Begich on from Alaska. And Nick Begich, of course, was the son of a congressman who was killed in a plane crash. And he went on his own investigation and then came into this world of HARP technologies and various mind control devices. And on the Wendy Mesler show, he had a huge table full of these little handheld TV converter type remotes. Some no larger than a pack of cigarettes, some smaller. And he told Wendy to stand over maybe 20 feet away from him, and he pointed one at her, and he said, "What do you hear?" And she said, I hear music right in the center of my head. And this was a live television program.
Alan, this is brand new to me, and I'm stunned by it. I didn't know that Nick had equipment that could do that, so we're definitely going to have to get in touch with him and find out what that was.
Yes, well, I recorded the show, and he said, if I wanted to, I could just as easily have put words in your head. And he said, this equipment is obsolete. He said, the CIA were using this in the 1950s. So you can imagine what they have today.
Yes, we don't have to imagine, do we? You and I and the rest of us. Can you tell us what some of your experiences that jolted you into the reality of this stuff? That it's not just written in some book somewhere, that it's for real, and you've experienced it.
Yes. I've also known people who were implanted with chips in Britain who had them removed, and they had been involved in the military, and all had minor operations within the military, and then had terrible upsets afterwards after they were discharged. One was actually committed to a mental institution, and he said that he felt there was something in his spine that was controlling him. And they did x-rays, and they did find this tiny little, they didn't know what it was at the time, but they removed it, and it all stopped. So they were testing them out mainly on military people back in the 1970s, and 60s actually.
That's quite a while ago. Our own membership, who are, most of us are not military. I am military, but I've never found any evidence of an implant. But a few of us, less than a handful, have had implants. The common experience with us is that those of us who have had them taken out, the doctor loses them or won't give them to us, saying something like, well, this doesn't belong to you, so I'm not going to give it to you.
And I guess it was probably the Department of Defense that owns it.
Well, ultimately, as most people, most savvy people anyway, know these days, government tends to do things through front entities like universities and businesses.
Yes, they do. But I also noticed that when I've been on the radio for 98, and I noticed the harassment techniques. What happens if they can't directly control you or get into your body? They'll try and get somebody near you or next to you to cause upsets all the time, always at a time, a critical time. But when you're writing something or about to go on a show, there'll be some tremendous flare-up. And that's what they do. They can control a person. If you're strong or whatever, or they have a hard time controlling you, they'll get to a person near you to do it. It could even be a neighbor. You know.
Amen. Amen.
Now,
and then let me comment, listeners. By the way, Alan has been broadcasting on radio station WWCR out of Tennessee, a 100,000 watt shortwave station which reaches all over the world. For some years now, he appears quite often on the Sweet Liberty program hosted by Jackie Petru. And so if anyone goes to the site and looks up the Patriot Broadcasters, they can find Jackie's show and can tune in and hear Alan fairly often.
And I think she has the archives as well, most of the shows.
Mm-hmm.
But we've run into a lot of this kind of information. And I also noticed about 3 years ago, when I was getting a lot of response from the writings I was sending out, that whenever I was driving on country roads, I noticed that all the oncoming vehicles would swerve over to my side, one after another, and then swerve right back again. And I thought, what's happening here to these people? And this happened for a matter of weeks. And I have nothing else to conclude that something was making them swerve over.
Well, I don't know if you've read Terrorist Stalking in America by David Lawson. He's a private investigator in Florida, and his book describes, he actually infiltrated and rode with some of these gangs, and they do travel around in convoys, so you were probably facing a convoy of these stalking gang members.
One night I was walking my dog. Now, I live in the country down near Mansfield, which is north of Toronto, and I had a dirt road, very little traffic on it ever. And I was walking the dog one night up the hill, and a black SUV drove up very slow with its lights off. And I stood there, of course, wondering why this thing was conscious of me. I was standing in the middle of the road. It was very dark, and I shone my flashlight at it, and of course we had the black tinted windows, and it just stood there, stationary, halfway up the hill. I'm looking at it for about 10 minutes, and it reversed all the way back to about half a mile, back up to the road it came off. And the next morning when I got up, there's a black SUV sitting just outside my house. And when I opened the door to go up to see who was there, they drove off again. So these are harassment techniques which are used to frighten you off from what you're doing, basically.
Yes, indeed. I can only remember the time that I had a guy in a black Cadillac dressed like a mafia don pull up in front of me and stare at me for a full hour as I did my first picketing excursion in Hamilton, Ontario here. And it didn't stop me, but he caught up with me at a stoplight and pulled up very close, almost hit me, rolled down his passenger window and looked at me with a big toothy grin and applauded. And I swear this fellow was recruited because he looked exactly like the mafia don Carlo Gambino.
Oh, yeah.
He had a gray fedora with a black band. It was a classic. And it didn't stop me, and nothing happened after that. But they do these things. This is par for the course.
The worst it got was again probably 4 years ago. It was a winter time. I had been doing a lot of the shows, get a tremendous response, and I was beginning to bring in the Canadian listeners. And just before we went on a show, a helicopter came overhead, very low, so low that the house shook. And I had the wood fire going. And the next thing I knew was that I heard this whoomph, and the doors blew open in the fire, and then my chimney was on fire. So I ran outside, and I looked up, and there, right above the chimney, was this black military-type helicopter, and then it simply took off. I was prepared for this kind of thing to happen, and I ran up with a hose, and I started to put out the fire. Now, there was a white residue around the top of the chimney, very white, and I put out the fire. It took a while to do it, and then when I cleaned it out, it was still damp, of course, this residue at the bottom. And when it dried out, it burst into flames again. So I believe there was magnesium there, very bright, brilliant light.
Or phosphorus.
Oh, and phosphorus,
Yeah.
So they'll do this kind of thing if you're getting out to people and telling them, which are obvious truths that they don't want to be known by the public.
Absolutely, and as I say, with me, I have 3 recording adapters which are defunct. They were bought brand new within the last month. Every one of them I tested when I got it home, and I immediately put it in my shoulder bag and carried it there. They have never left my side, and yet they have been remotely disabled.
Yes.
And so they do not like publicity.
Oh, no. No. They don't mind if you're simply into the political game and blaming this politician or that politician. But when you're getting closer to the truth that there's a hidden hand behind all of this, then that you start to come under fire, for sure.
Amen. In fact, why don't you tell the listeners about what happened when you tried to get the first copies of your third book published, Alan, not long ago?
Yeah. What had happened was I had many copies of the first 2 made up in different photocopy shops down Barry Way, and I never had any problem at all. And I had a couple of sets made up in one of the Staples. There's 2 Staples up in Sudbury.
Now, for listeners outside of Canada, I don't know if Staples exists, but Staples is a large office equipment, office supplies, and office services supplier here in Canada.
Yep. And so I had trouble getting one copy especially reproduced. They always fouled it up. So this time I thought I need all three done with this new one as well. So I took the first, second, and third master copies to Staples. I waited till most of the rush was over for the day, so I went in about 5 o'clock, at 5 in the afternoon. And the girl looked at them and said, "Oh, that'll be no problem. Probably in half an hour I'll have 10 sets of each made up." So I went for a walk for half an hour and came back, and I saw pandemonium raining all over this big part of the store, and there were 3 girls in there working. One of them was assistant manageress, who was going through my master copies, pulling out pages that she thought were the typing was too close to an edge or something, and redoing them, but not putting them back in the file. And so I saw this mess all over the place. Then I looked at the back bench, of a workbench, which is almost 25, maybe 30 feet long, and it's wide. And they had all different pages of my stuff, copies they'd made across this entire bench. And there was parts of my master copies on the front bench where the customers came in, and some of the customers were reading them. And it was a sort of, it was round at the front desk, so where I was standing, there were some parts of the copies there too. And I said, "Well, what's going on here?" And after the manageress explained what she was doing, she says, "Well, there's some trouble with the machines. They've had 2 big photocopy machines, multiple copiers going there. And she says, I don't understand it. They've worked perfectly all month and all week and all day. But each time we put your copies on, they keep jamming. And so they put it onto the other machine and it started to do the same." And I was there for 4 hours as they went through this. And they turned off so many pages and then put them on the back bench, scattered around, and then go back again and pull out the ones that were jammed and ripped and try to do them. And it was such a weird thing to watch happening, because the 3 different women were working there independently on my stuff, not communicating with each other. And at one point, when it was quiet, I said, "Well, what's happening?" I said, "I've been here for 4 hours, just what's happening?" And the girl who was reading my stuff turned to me like a robot, and with a very pleasant face said, "Well, nothing at the moment." She said, I said, "Well, shouldn't there be something happening?" I said, "You're all standing reading my material. The machines are stopped." She said, "Oh, we're not allowed to read the customer's material." I'd watched them doing this for the last hour or so.
Right.
So they seemed to be oblivious of what they were doing. Their answers were out of context with the mess that was all around. And even the manager came across. He was a man, and he said, "Oh, it must be the humidity that's jamming it." I said, "Well, how come 5 customers in between mine have used the same machines and they've worked perfectly fine?" And he looked, and he had a strange look at his face, and he said, he just repeated what he said, "Well, it must be the humidity." But no, I'd watched these other customers get their stuff put through in between trying to do mine, and there was no hitch at all with them.
Absolutely. Let me back you up, Alan. Alan is not unique in this. I just spent 3 days in a copy shop here in Hamilton trying to get an 8.5 by 11 version of the Vigilante Stalking Shoulder Patch, which is on the cover page of shoestringradio.net. And it was a simple single transfer, iron-on transfer to a T-shirt. And it's taken 3 days. Every time I've gone in there, the gal who runs the shop is on the telephone with technical support for her color copier. because she says every time she puts my job on it, the copier screws up. And she finally got me one. I brought it home. I followed the instructions exactly, and it shredded to pieces. So she made another copy on another brand of transfer, and the same thing happened again. So after 3 days and about half a dozen visits and several hours on her part to do one single copy, I don't have a transfer.
Yeah.
And this happens all the time. And just last night, Jackie couldn't print out a report that she wanted for her show. These perpetrators are somehow able to disable anything electronic at a distance and do it surgically. And they can flip the failure off and on like a light switch. So if another customer comes in, it'll work fine. And this is not fiction. This is not sensational. Although Alan is an author selling books, that's not why we're here. We're passing on to you listeners the state of technology as it actually is, as opposed to what you've been told when you were in school and through the popular media.
Yeah, and I found too, well, at the very end, after 4 hours, 4 hours and 50 minutes, I said, well, try and find what you've got left of a master copies, if any. I said, throw them in a box and I'll just take them home. And so they did that. I still have to look around the front desk and there would be flying everywhere. And occasional page here, occasional page there, and do most of it myself. And then I said, I don't want everybody reading my material. I said, you've got hundreds and hundreds of pages all over the shop here. And the girl said, oh, we won't read them. She says, they have to be shredded. So what was interesting, when they were reading them, they weren't reading them all together. They were standing in different parts of the store with different pages, reading them silently. And I wondered what was reading them through their eyes. But that's the impression I got at the time.
That's more than an impression, Alan. Our group does have occasional instances where some sort of harassment is planned based on what could only have been seen through our eyes.
Yeah.
Briefly, I ordered 16 topographic maps of New England where I lived originally, and I got every single map ID number correct on the order. The order came in with 3 mistakes, 3 maps that were picked incorrectly. However, there was something special about the ones that were substituted. Every single one of those was a map that I had focused my eyes on and then said, no, I'm not going to order that one. And this is the type of stunt they pull. They actually want us to know that they have these capabilities, but they choose to do things in such a way that you can't prove it to anyone, so that if you tell anyone about it, you're considered mentally ill.
Yeah, and of course, you've got information to impart, so any information you have is discredited as well if you tell them what's happening to you.
Absolutely. However, Alan, you know, we're in the 21st century, and more people are reporting being targeted, lots of them. 1 in 100, for example, is a fairly good estimate based on some surveys we did. And we think it's just time to get the information in front of the public anyway, regardless of whether they like it or not, whether they believe it or not, because it's the truth.
It's the truth, but the thing is, you see, it is documentable. A lot of the people involved in this, so I find that the ones who control the system, and it's a system, that's the whole thing. I call it the system because it's their system in which we live. We're trained to go into the workforce in their system and basically work for them through our taxes and so on. And they upgrade their system every so often. And of course, right now we're in the middle of a very big upgrade into the next stage, which is going to be a vastly different world than the one we've known. But Bertrand Russell, he was a British lord. He wrote one book, many books actually, but one book in particular on this very topic. And he he had experimented back in the beginning of the 1900s with chartered schools from the British royalty. They'd given them charters to experiment with in schools on children, on behavior modifications. And in that time, he was finding ways of giving pre-pubertal children, getting them interested in sex, to see what effect it would have on them after puberty, to see if it would actually create a generation of sex-addicted teenagers. That was his mission.
Well, he succeeded, hasn't he? Kids are so young these days.
It was called Education and the Good Life. It's worth getting a hold of for anyone wanting to know that, yeah, they have been involved in experiments on the mind. But later on, he wrote a book called The Impact of Science on Society. And it might be available in your library. An excellent read, because in it he goes on, he says in his book that a technique will shortly be used on the general public of the world based on electronics. He said where mind control can actually be induced upon every individual. He said the easiest thing to induce is emotional changes. He said, but we can go much, much further. He says, and the people concerned, the subjects, will have no idea that they have mind or thought intrusion being electronically used on them. And now that's in his book, and he was a high spokesman for the group that run his world.
Oh, I can back him up, because while it doesn't happen really often, we do go through instances, we meaning our group of vigilante stalking and electronic harassment targets, we do go through instances where we do something out of character, and we cannot tell that this thought and control pattern is being imposed on us. There's no sensation, but you certainly do know it once it's finished. And you do strange things, like I went to the office in the middle of the night once, and I was sure I had to get there right then to do something. When I got there, I realized the stunt was over, and I had no reason to be there. So, I mean, this, what Alan's talking about is going on. We can testify to that.
And it's an even more documented, or better documented, later book put out by Zbigniew Brzezinski. And he, I think, was the Secretary of State. And he was also the head of the Department for War under Reagan and different presidents. And at the present time, he's an advisor to George Bush. He's been on television recently, in fact, in Canada, talking about the new world that is coming, along with Kissinger, Henry Kissinger. Now, both of them, Brzezinski and Kissinger, are members of the Bilderberger group. That's a very high world decision-making group that has annual meetings and very well guarded wherever they go. The Queen goes, the bankers of the world go, the banking families go, and certain selected politicians go. You always know who's going to be president, because the person will be asked to go before he runs for presidency. That's where they choose them.
And guess who went to a recent meeting? Arnold Schwarzenegger.
That's right. Not only did he do that, but Lord Rothschild in Britain had a helicopter fly him over to Rothschild's castle when it was there.
Now, and of course, listeners, we know from research done that Arnold Schwarzenegger's past is such that he's kind of in favor of the same type of things Adolf Hitler was.
Oh, he's into eugenics. That's what bodybuilding is. It's changing you from what you are into something which they claim is more perfect. And that's basically where it's all going. Brzezinski wrote a book called it was Between Two Ages. It's about this very time. He wrote it back in the 1970s. And there's a section in there called the Technotronic Era. Now remember that he is still an advisor to the present president. And in this book, Between Two Ages, the Technotronic Era, it goes through the same scenario that Bertrand Russell had written many years before him. And the Technotronic Era, he said through the various technological advances we have, which are unknown by the general public, he said we are now in a position to control the minds of every single individual on the planet. Yeah, and he says without their knowledge or them even being aware of it. And he brought in some of the HARP technologies, such as the station in Alaska, the electromagnetic pulsation that they use, plus the much smaller mobile versions which they do have. And he said that there were various means to improve the capability of HARP technology to control the mind. And he said that if the air were to be full of metallic type particles, that would basically make the atmosphere far more conductive, and we could spread the pulsations out in a far, far greater area. Now, this spraying that's going on and has been for the last few years all over the world except for China and Switzerland, which were the only two countries not to sign the Open Skies Treaty. You'll find that the spraying aluminum oxide, barium, and there's also traces of copper found now. So these are all metallic substances, and it is definitely making the atmosphere more conducive to this pulsating HARP-type technology, which is being used consistently. You can pick up those stations on the shortwave radio that are going 24 hours a day now in two different areas, and the sound is unmistakable. It's like nothing else you'll hear on shortwave.
Is that the motorboat sound that we're hearing right now, Alan?
What you're hearing now is usually an even different frequency from the original one used at Riga, and the Russian Soviets were using it. This one now sounds more like a wow, 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 wow sound, constant, and it's loud, and very evenly spaced, and you'll find it just before 12160 in the morning. It's just before there on that band, and then in the afternoon and during the night you'll find it before 5000, and you can come across it. So it's going 24 hours a day now, and that's just the one in Alaska. And of course they have coupled this technology, this Tesla technology. Nikola Tesla apparently was the guy who first came out with it. They've coupled it with the satellites, so they can boost this capability of theirs and target any area, or finally pinpoint any individual they want to on the planet.
Do you have any books that are authoritative and referenced that say that?
They had articles written about the HARP project in some of the Canadian newspapers quite a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. Because the problem with the literature is that it's so diluted. I mean, to find one reference to the effect on somebody's mind out of all the HARP literature is...
Yeah. Well, you'll find it in Brzezinski's book, though.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, in Between Two Ages. Yeah.
Between Two Ages, I see.
Yeah, because he goes into that in the chapter called the Technotronic Era. He goes into these, he touches on them. He doesn't go into it in very fine detail, but he does touch on the basic techniques, the electronic techniques that they have already used.
And his highest rank in the U.S. federal cabinet was what?
I think he was Secretary of State for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was in charge of the War Department. I don't know what they call it there.
Defense, yeah.
Yeah. So, and now he's still an advisor to George Bush. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the American version of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. That's the American branch, in fact.
Right.
And of course, that was set up back in the late 1900s by Cecil Rhodes, who created Rhodesia, and Lord Rothschild, and they ended up acquiring all of the gold and diamond mines across South Africa to build up their wealth, to do what they claimed was to eventually control the world through finances, and to bring in a certain type of culture worldwide based on the British system. So now that they have the Canada has a group here. Lloyd Axworthy, in fact, is one of the highest-ranking members for the Canadian side, and they call it the Canadian Institute for International Affairs. All Commonwealth countries have it. They call it the International Affairs, and they simply use Australian, Canadian, and so on for the first word.
Yes, Canada's kind of disappointing, aren't they, Alan? They seem to be keeping very quiet on all of these important issues.
Oh, tremendously. We're supposed to be happy and just drink our six-packs here and have a good time.
Watch hockey.
Yeah, watch hockey. Listen to the crisis, ongoing crisis, financial and otherwise, and leave it to the experts. That's the bottom line. Bertrand Russell, on the impact of science on society, said, and he wrote that back in the 1940s, and he said the world will be trained to only take documentation or news from experts, he says, until they're unable to think for themselves. And that's the stage that we've got to. And then again, Brzezinski reiterates that in his book, Between Two Ages, and he said, shortly the time is coming when the general public will be unable to think for themselves. They will be downloaded by information on the previous night's news, and that will be their topic at work the following day.
Well, that's happening right now, for sure. Just try and tell them about this subject. Their eyes glass over and they look out the window.
Yes. You need a Peter Mansbridge type figure or a Dan Rather to tell them something. Then they will believe it. But if anyone else tells them, they won't, because they've been trained to listen and only believe these authoritative figures.
Well, Canada did one tiny little thing that was really good, but they aborted it. And you put me onto this originally. For a couple of years, not recently, but a couple of years ago, the Canadian government apparently was sending out letters to Canadian citizens who asked about the chemtrails.
Yeah. And
they said in the letter that it wasn't being done by Canadian aircraft.
That's right.
Which is an admission that it's going on.
Yes.
Nowadays, they won't talk about it. They just say, we don't know what you're talking about.
Well, a few years ago, aircraft were coming over, before the trail started, over the whole of Canada. There were aircraft coming across from the States, and they were spraying low over the town of Espanola, which is near Manitoulin.
In Ontario, yes.
Ontario. And they sprayed it heavily for months. The people there noticed that they were having a lot of miscarriages. Even the animals and the deer and so on were having miscarriages. And it got so bad that the people, the residents, drew up a committee, and they did take it all the way to the Supreme Court. And it did get an admission that the U.S. aircraft had been testing something out on them. And so that's where it ended, with an admission that this happened from the Supreme Court of Canada.
Yes, and believe it or not, I heard on one late night show a tape that a caller made from an air traffic controller in, I think it was Victoria, British Columbia, where the controller actually stated on the telephone that these were combined military exercises. So it has leaked out, but now it's considered so secret that they won't even admit that they ever talked about it.
Well, they can't, you see. Now, generally what they'll do is tell people declassify it about 50 years after the event.
Yes.
Because most of the people concerned by then have died.
Right.
Or generally from the spraying. But the Calgary in 1948 was sprayed heavily for a full week by flying fortresses. By the permission of the Canadian government in collusion with the U.S. government.
Aren't they generous?
And that is documented, and Don Scott from Sudbury has that information, and he has put that in a book form, and he documents who gave permission, and it was all signed by the Prime Minister and so on, and so the whole city was used for, and then of course the health authorities followed each individual, unknowingly to the individual, throughout their lives, to see what effects it had on them, and that came down with cancers and so on.
Indeed. So you can see, listener, you can begin to get the picture that our group, we're not just a few cranks talking about feuds with neighbors. This is a worldwide, centuries-old political agenda that technology is now enabling to come to fruition. And people like Alan are doing heroic work unscrambling all the subterfuge and cover-ups that have gone on. Okay, well, Alan, I'm going to thank you for coming on and sharing just a small preview of your work, which extends back for years, and I hope that we can have you on as developments begin to become better known, and to give us some color commentary on them.
Sure, that'd be a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Alan, and we certainly wish you all the best in your endeavors, and we hope that for years to come you'll be keeping us posted on the inside story.
I certainly will.
Now, for more information, listeners, on vigilante gang stalking and electronic harassment, please see the links on this show's website, which is shoestringradio.net. Well, folks, that's it for today. I invite you to join us again next time as we travel the road to freedom. And remember, freedom isn't free.